Have you ever sat down in a seat you worked your whole life to earn, only to be told you didn't belong there? Picture this: a calm black CEO boards a plane, first-class ticket in hand, only to be denied his rightful seat. Not because of a mistake in the system, but because of a judgment written on his skin. In that moment, 25 minutes stretched like an eternity. Would you stay silent and swallow the humiliation? Or would you stand up and risk everything to expose the truth? Now imagine it's you. You've built your career, sacrificed years, carried the weight of your family's dreams. Then a stranger's word is placed above your dignity. What would you do? Would you move quietly to another seat? Or would you refuse to move, knowing the cost? This is not just a story about an airline. It's about every moment when ordinary people are told they don't belong where they've already earned the right to stand. Stay with us, because what happened next shut down an entire booking system and changed the way we think about respect in the skies. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss stories that matter. The morning air at Oakland International carried the kind of energy you only find in airports. A chorus of rolling suitcases rattled across tiled floors. The faint aroma of drip coffee drifted from a kiosk near the gate. Over the loudspeaker, a calm but tired voice announced boarding for a flight to Dallas. Travelers moved with their usual mix of hurry and hesitation, clutching passport, strollers, or the half-finished breakfast burrito they had grabbed on the way. Among them walked a man who did not try to stand out. Derrick Caldwell, 52 years old, strode with the steady rhythm of someone who had lived enough storms to know the value of calm. He wore a navy blazer, dark jeans, and well-kept leather shoes. In his right hand, he carried a slim duffel bag. In his left, he held a small leather notebook creased at the corners, pages filled with years of thoughts and lessons. People rarely noticed Derrick at first glance. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his presence quiet but commanding. His voice, when he used it, carried both warmth and weight. But this morning, he preferred silence. He had a meeting waiting on the other side of the country, and a long list of notes he wanted to review before the plane touched down. Nothing more, nothing less. As the boarding gate beeped his pass, he stepped into the jet bridge, its narrow tunnel humming with recycled air. The closer he came to the cabin, the more he looked forward to a seat in first-class 2A, by the window. Not for the champagne, not for the perks, simply for the peace, the space to think. A few hours of stillness to prepare for what lay ahead. Inside the aircraft, the lighting glowed soft and yellow. Flight attendants moved briskly, adjusting overhead bins, greeting passengers. Derrick offered a polite smile, then turned toward his row. The seat was waiting wide leather cushions, tray folded neatly, armrests shining under the cabin lights. But before he could sit, a voice cut through the soft murmur of the cabin. "Excuse me, sir." It was sharp, clipped, not a greeting, but a command. Valerie Keene, the lead flight attendant, stepped into his path. Her uniform was pressed to perfection, her hair pinned tightly back. Her expression, however, carried suspicion. "That seat," she said, nodding toward 2A, "is reserved. I'll need to see your boarding pass again." Derrick paused. He had just scanned the pass not 2 minutes ago. He had felt the scanner beep, the gate open, the agent wave him through. Still, he slipped the ticket from his blazer pocket and handed it to her without a word. Valerie studied it, her eyes narrowed, lips pursed. She murmured, as if something didn't quite add up. Then she glanced back at Derrick, her gaze lingering longer than necessary. "You'll understand," she said finally, "if I ask for additional verification. We've had mix-ups in this section before. Around them, A few passengers shifted uncomfortably. A man across the aisle adjusted his tie, pretending not to listen. A woman in row 3 raised her eyebrows, then quickly looked away. The silence in the cabin thickened. Derrick remained still. His voice, when it came, was low and steady. "My ticket says 2A. That's my seat. You've already scanned it." "Yes," Valerie replied quickly, "but I'd prefer to confirm. Some passengers occasionally try to upgrade themselves without authorization." There it was, the unspoken suggestion. Derrick had lived long enough to recognize that tone. It was the same one he had heard decades earlier, as a teenager in Alabama, when a store clerk told him the shoes he wanted were a little too expensive for someone like you. It was the tone he heard at college, when a professor asked if he was in the right classroom, because surely he couldn't belong in the advanced economics seminar. That tone had a way of shrinking a man in public. It asked him to prove his worth in spaces he had already earned. Derrick took a slow breath, pressing his thumb against the edge of his leather notebook. The familiar texture grounded him. "I assure you," he said, still calm, "there is no mistake." But Valerie did not move. Her eyes flicked past him, toward another flight attendant near the galley. A silent signal. The second attendant nodded and stepped closer. Passengers began whispering. "Is there a problem?" someone asked softly. Derrick felt the weight of every stare. Yet he did not raise his voice. He had learned that dignity did not require volume, only presence, in the back of his mind. Though, another thought pressed forward. Not again. Not here. Not after everything I've built. For 30 years he had built companies, steered crises, and created jobs for thousands. He had written checks that kept entire startups alive. He had helped redesign systems that moved millions of travelers every year. And still, in this quiet cabin, with his ticket in his hand, he was just another black man being asked to prove he belonged. He felt the sting of it, sharp and cold, but he did not let it show. Instead, he glanced down at the seat number stitched onto the headrest 2A, clear as daylight, waiting for him. He met Valerie's eyes. "This is my seat," he said again, "and I intend to sit in it." The air between them held steady, taut as a wire about to snap, and though no one in the cabin could yet see it, the first spark of a much larger storm had already been struck. The cabin lights seemed a little brighter now, though no one had touched the switch. The weight of quiet judgment filled the air. Derrick stood near his seat, his boarding pass still in Valerie's hand. Every second stretched longer than it should have, like the pause before a verdict. "Mr. Green," Valerie called softly, without looking away from Derrick. From the galley, Thomas Green, the flight supervisor, stepped forward. His shoulders were squared, his tone firm but cautious. He was younger than Derrick, maybe mid-40s, with a neatly trimmed beard and the kind of posture that tried to project authority. "What's the issue here?" Thomas asked. Valerie held out the boarding pass. "This gentleman is attempting to take seat 2A. I just want to confirm his eligibility." Thomas glanced at the paper, then at Derrick. His brow furrowed, though not in confusion, more like calculation. "Do you have another form of ID?" "Sir," Derrick tilted his head slightly. "My ticket is valid. You scanned it at the gate. That should be enough." "I understand," Thomas said, voice calm. "But for security purposes, we may require additional proof." The words landed heavy. They were familiar in their vagueness, the kind that left room for discretion, room where bias could hide. Passengers shifted in their seats. A man in row 3 adjusted his glasses, pretending to read the safety card. A woman whispered something to her husband, her eyes flicking toward Derrick, then away. No one spoke up. Derrick drew a slow breath. He had heard this song before, too many times. The melody was always the same polite phrases, professional masks, but underneath it, a single refrain. "You don't belong here." He kept his tone even. "Sir, I am in the right seat. Your system confirms it. If you'd like to verify, check your manifest." Thomas hesitated, the silence stretching long. It would have been simple to scan the roster on his tablet, but he didn't. Instead, he shifted his stance, as if to block Derrick from moving forward. Valerie folded her arms, lips pursed tight. The tension in the cabin thickened, sticky as humidity before a storm. At that moment, a voice rose from a few rows back. "Is something wrong?" Heads turned. A young woman, barely out of her teens, had lifted her phone, recording the exchange. Her name was Amira Lopez. She wore a denim jacket, earbuds hanging around her neck. Her eyes flashed with indignation. "I'm live right now," Amira said. "People are watching." Valerie stiffened. "Miss, please put your phone away. Recording is not allowed." But Amira didn't budge. "If he has a ticket, let him sit. Why's this even a problem?" A ripple moved through the cabin. Passengers glanced between Derrick and the crew, caught between curiosity and discomfort. Thomas straightened, his jaw tight. "Sir, if you don't comply, I'll have to call airport security." There it was, the threat that always came next. Derrick felt his chest tighten, not from fear, but from the deep ache of recognition. He thought of the many times he had been given the same ultimatum, dressed in different words. He thought of his son, years ago, being questioned by police for walking through his own neighborhood. He thought of his late wife, who used to say, "Every battle doesn't need fire. Sometimes stillness is the sharpest blade." His fingers brushed the edge of his notebook, the leather warm against his palm. Inside were lines of reminders he had written for himself. Hold steady. Choose dignity, but never surrender truth. He looked at Thomas, then at Valerie. His voice was quiet, but every syllable carried, "I am not moving. This is my seat. If you want to resolve this, check your system." Thomas's eyes flickered, uncertain. He glanced at Valerie, who lifted her chin in defiance. From the corner of his vision, Derrick noticed an older man in the aisle seat across from him. Richard Moore, late 60s, silver hair combed back, a leather briefcase tucked under the seat. Richard shook his head slowly, muttering under his breath. "Some people always trying to get what they didn't pay for." The words weren't loud, but they were enough. Derrick heard them. So did Amira, whose live audience swelled past 1,000 viewers. She swung her phone toward Richard. "You don't even know him." He showed his ticket. "Stop assuming." Richard stiffened, suddenly aware that strangers were watching him from a glowing screen. He turned away, lips pressed thin. The air in the cabin grew taut. Every sound the rustle of a newspaper. The ding of an overhead bin felt amplified. Derrick's heart beat steady, but inside, two currents collided. One was fury, hot and sharp, urging him to unleash the storm he kept chained. The other was resolve, forged over decades, reminding him that power was not in volume, but in control. He closed his eyes for a second, listening to the thrum of the engines outside the window. Not yet alive, but waiting. He thought, "I could end this now. I could make them see." When he opened his eyes, they were steady, unreadable. Thomas shifted again, lowering his voice. "Sir, this doesn't have to get worse. Step aside, and we'll sort it out later." But Derrick knew what that meant. He had seen later too many times. Later meant forgotten. Later meant buried. Later meant injustice swept beneath polished carpet. "No," Derrick said simply. "We sort it out now." The words carried more weight than volume. Silence fell again. Passengers held their breath, sensing something they couldn't yet name. Valerie's face hardened. She tapped her tablet screen, fingers trembling slightly, and muttered to Thomas, "I'll call him." Thomas nodded. "Security. The final card." Amira's live stream ticked upward. 2,000, then 3. Comments flooded. "This is wrong. Why's he singled out? Stand your ground." Derrick remained still, his hand resting lightly on the notebook. The decision was already forming, heavy as iron, inevitable as dawn. He would not shout. He would not plead. He would act. And when he did, the entire airline would feel it. The moment Valerie pressed the screen of her tablet, the atmosphere inside the cabin seemed to shiver. It was as if the oxygen had thinned, as though every passenger had stopped breathing at once. Derrick stood steady, but inside, he felt the air shift. He knew the pattern, the escalation, the threat, the arrival of men in uniforms who would see him first as a problem and only later, maybe, as a person. But something different happened this time. Amira Lopez. Her phone lifted high. Didn't lower it. The red glow of her live stream reflected against the seat back, catching eyes in every direction. The number of viewers jumped again 5,000, then 6. Comments scrolled like wildfire. "This is outrageous." "Not again." "We're watching." Valerie noticed. Her lips tightened. "Miss, I told you no filming." Amira kept her voice calm, but it carried. "People need to see. If you're confident this is fair, then why are you afraid of the camera?" Passengers shifted. Some looked away, unwilling to engage, but others leaned forward, drawn into the current. A middle-aged woman in row 5 whispered to her husband, "She has a point." Richard Moore, the older man with silver hair, muttered again, "These kids think phones solve everything." But the phone was already changing everything. Derrick felt the shift. He had walked into battles alone before, carrying dignity like a shield, absorbing silence from those who should have stood beside him. But this time, someone else was speaking, someone unafraid. His eyes met Amira's for a brief second. She nodded once, as if to say, "I've got this part. You just hold steady." Thomas Green, the supervisor, cleared his throat. "Sir," he said to Derrick, his tone more formal now, "you are creating a disturbance. Either step aside voluntarily, or we'll have to remove you from this flight." The words were precise, rehearsed. They weren't really about disturbance. They were about control. Derrick said nothing at first. He let the silence stretch. He wanted every passenger in that cabin to sit with it, the absurdity of calling calm refusal a threat. Amira's voice cut in again. "He's not disturbing anyone. He's standing in front of his seat. Look at him. He's not shouting. He's not fighting. Why are you treating him like this?" The comments on her live stream poured faster. "This is discrimination. Check the manifest." "Stay strong, sir," Valerie snapped. "That's enough." Her voice carried through the cabin, louder than she intended. Heads turned, the calm veneer cracked, revealing the nerves underneath. For Derrick, that crack mattered. He knew power often shouted when it felt its grip slipping. He drew in a long, deliberate breath. Then, for the first time since this began, he let his gaze sweep the cabin. He looked at every face, one by one. He wanted them to feel the weight of what was happening, not as distant spectators, but as participants in silence. Some met his eyes and quickly looked away. A few held his gaze, uneasy but steady. And then there was Richard Moore, stiff-backed, lips pressed into a thin line. When Derrick's eyes met his, Richard shifted uncomfortably, tapping his briefcase with restless fingers. The silence broke when the cabin intercom crackled. A voice from the gate supervisor Green. "Please confirm the situation in cabin 1. Thomas reached for his radio. "We may have a non-compliant passenger." Those words hit Derrick harder than the tone had. Non-compliant. He had lived long enough to know what that label did. It turned human beings into checkboxes. It stripped stories, stripped context, and left only threat. In his mind, he heard his father's voice, deep and tired after long shifts in the steel mill. "Son, the system won't always see you, but you must make sure they can't ignore you." That was the moment Derrick's decision hardened. His hand slid into the inner pocket of his blazer. He drew out his phone, sleek, black, and different from the ordinary devices around him. Its interface was secure, encrypted. Only a handful of people in the country would recognize it for what it was. Amira lowered her phone slightly, curious. A ripple moved through the cabin. Even Valerie and Thomas seemed uncertain now. Derrick unlocked the device with a print of his thumb. The screen glowed with a simple command line. He whispered, almost too softly for anyone to hear, initiate Sentinel Protocol. The phone vibrated once, then again, and then the cabin screens blinked. Across airports nationwide, check-in kiosks froze. Boarding gates stalled. The digital backbone of Redwood Air, the airline that had questioned his belonging, began to lock itself down. In Oakland, the departure boards flickered. Red system error. Please stand by. In Dallas, passengers groaned as lines of check-in halted. In New York, agents scrambled, their screens frozen mid-scan. The ripple had become a wave, unstoppable. Inside the cabin, phones buzzed with alerts. Valerie's tablet chimed, flashing a message she had never seen before. Network suspended, operations on hold. She stared at the screen, confused. What? What is this? Thomas frowned, tapping his device. It's not working. Nothing's working. Amira's livestream caught the moment perfectly. Her voice rose, incredulous but electric. "Y'all, something just happened. The whole system is down. Look at their faces. The viewer count surged 10,000, 15, then 20. Comments flew like sparks. What did he do? He shut it down. This is history." Derrick slipped the phone back into his blazer pocket. His expression didn't change. Calm, steady, anchored. He spoke softly, but every person nearby heard it clear. "You wanted proof that I belong. Consider this proof. Without me, your system doesn't move. Not today." Gas echoed through the cabin. Richard Moore's mouth fell open, his earlier muttering silenced. Valerie blinked, suddenly unsure. Thomas stood frozen, torn between authority and fear. The engines outside hummed faintly, still waiting for clearance. But inside the cabin, it was clear nothing would move until Derrick chose. For a long, stretched moment, the only sound was Amira's phone buzzing with the flood of online voices. Then Derrick reached for his leather notebook. He set it on the armrest of seat 2A, finally taking the place that had been his from the beginning. He opened the notebook, pen poised, as though nothing extraordinary had happened, as though he had simply reclaimed what was already his. The storm had only begun, but Derrick Caldwell sat in his rightful seat, calm in the eye of it, and outside, across the country. Redwood Air trembled. For nearly 30 seconds, no one inside the cabin spoke. It was the kind of silence that vibrated in the chest, the kind that made people aware of their own heartbeat. Derrick sat in seat Totoe, leather notebook open, pen balanced lightly between his fingers. He didn't look triumphant. He didn't gloat. He simply existed as if reclaiming what had always belonged to him. That composure calm against the storm was what unsettled the most. Valerie tried to recover first. Her training told her to project control, to take command, but her voice betrayed her. This is a federal issue," she stammered, clutching the frozen tablet. You can't just—" Her words trailed off. She didn't know what to accuse him of. Not theft, not violence. His crime was existing in the wrong skin, in the wrong seat, and refusing to move. Thomas, the supervisor, tapped his radio again. Static. He cursed under his breath, then louder. Operations. Do you copy? Nothing. A ripple of unease passed through the passengers. People shifted, glanced at one another. A young man in row 7 whispered, "He just shut down the whole system, didn't he?" His companion nodded, eyes wide. Amira's livestream captured every flicker of fear and awe. The viewer count passed 30,000. Comments rolled in, furious and jubilant all at once. Finally, someone standing up. History happening live. This man is fearless. Richard Moore, who had once muttered about kids with phones, sat stiff in his seat. His hands knotted together. His voice, usually full of certainty, was hushed now. I didn't realize. His words dissolved into the stale air. Derrick wrote something in his notebook, the scratch of the pen oddly loud. Then he spoke, quiet but steady. Do you know what it feels like to be treated as an intruder in a space you've paid to enter? To be told you don't belong, not because of a rule, but because of a face. His eyes lifted, sweeping the cabin again. For me, it isn't rare. It's Tuesday. The sentence landed like a stone dropped in water. The ripples spread, touching each passenger. For some, it was uncomfortable truth. For others, recognition. Valerie bristled. This isn't about race, she said quickly. But her voice lacked conviction. It's about procedure, Amira cut in. Then why didn't you check the manifest before you called him a disturbance? Why was his calm refusal labeled non-compliance? You skipped straight to threat. The words hit harder because they were undeniable. Even those who wished to stay neutral shifted uneasily, realizing they had witnessed the sequence too. Thomas swallowed. His authority was unraveling, thread by thread. He tried again. Mr. Caldwell, let's resolve this quietly. Step off the plane, and we can sort this out at the gate. Derrick's pen stilled. He looked up, meeting Thomas's eyes. His tone remained calm, but each word carried steel. You want me to leave quietly, but it was not quiet when you questioned my presence. It was not quiet when you threatened removal, and it will not be quiet now. Not anymore. Amira's viewers erupted in agreement. Say it louder. We hear you. Never quiet again. A baby in row 10 cried, startled by the tension, and the sound pierced the silence like truth itself, innocent, unfiltered. The mother hushed gently, rocking back and forth, her eyes on Derrick with something like gratitude. Meanwhile, at Redwood Air's headquarters in Chicago, chaos bloomed. Screens flickered in the operations center. Phones rang incessantly, and executives scrambled. What the hell is going on with booking? One manager barked. We've got passengers stuck in Dallas, New York, Denver. Everything's frozen. Someone whispered the name Caldwell. Back in the cabin, Derrick folded his hands over his notebook. His voice softened. I didn't want this. I came here to fly. Nothing more. But sometimes, when the system refuses to see you, you must show the system that you hold it in your hand. The weight of his words pressed into every chest. Even Valerie, jaw tight, looked away. Richard Moore cleared his throat, his voice unsteady. "Sir, I think we owe you an apology. It wasn't much, but it cracked something open. A recognition. A beginning." Valerie's face flushed. She turned sharply toward him. "You don't speak for the crew." She snapped. "No," Richard said, surprising himself with the firmness in his tone. "I speak for myself. And I was wrong." A murmur ran through the cabin. The silence was breaking, reshaping itself into something else: collective awareness. Derrick didn't smile, but his eyes softened, if only for a heartbeat. He nodded slightly toward Richard, acknowledging the shift without absolving the past. Amira whispered into her phone, voice low, full of awe. "Do you see this? People are waking up right here, in real time." Her viewers responded with fire. "This is why we watch. Keep streaming. Don't stop." The captain's voice finally came over the intercom, shaky but controlled. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a temporary operational delay. Please remain seated." He didn't mention Derrick. He didn't mention the confrontation. He couldn't not, when every word might be broadcast to millions. Derrick leaned back in his seat. The battle wasn't over, not even close. But the weight of silence had shifted. It was no longer crushing him alone. It was pressing on the airline, on the crew, on the viewers across the country. And for the first time in 25 long minutes, he allowed himself a breath that felt like space. The plane hadn't moved, but the ground beneath the system was already shaking. At Redwood Air's headquarters in Chicago, the usually steady hum of the operations center had become a storm. Monitors glowed with frozen dashboards. Agents lifted phones only to hear static. Lines of stranded passengers began forming in airports coast to coast. In the corner office on the 17th floor, Margaret Hayes, Redwood's CEO, stood stiff before a wall of screens. Her jaw tightened as she read the reports piling up. System unresponsive, ticketing suspended, boarding delayed nationwide. She turned to her chief of operations. "Tell me this isn't sabotage." The man shifted uneasily. "It's not sabotage in the traditional sense. Ma'am, this isn't external. This is internal authorization." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Internal from who?" The answer came reluctantly. Derrick Caldwell. The name landed heavy. She knew it. Everyone in the industry knew it. Caldwell wasn't just another wealthy executive. He was the mind behind Sentinel Systems, the backbone that many airlines, including Redwood, licensed for their digital infrastructure. Without him, nothing moved. Back on the plane, Derrick remained seated in 2A, still calm, still quiet. But his silence was louder than shouting. Every tick of the clock deepened the realization. One man, by choosing not to be erased, had stopped the wheels of a national carrier. Valerie paced the aisle, her confidence fraying. "This is unsustainable," she hissed to Thomas. "We have to take control." Thomas shook his head. His hands trembled as he rubbed his temples. "Control? Look around. We've lost it. If we drag him out now, every screen in the country will show it." Amira kept her phone steady, whispering updates to her swelling audience. "They can't touch him now. Not when the world is watching. We're at 50,000 viewers. This is bigger than one seat. This is the whole system." Richard Moore leaned forward, elbows on knees, speaking to no one in particular. All these years, I thought power was suits in boardrooms, but it's not. It's this man sitting quietly, while the rest of us fumble." Derrick's pen moved slowly across the page of his leather notebook. He wasn't writing about revenge or humiliation. He was drafting terms, outlining what reform must look like if dignity was to be restored not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. The intercom crackled again, this time more strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We're awaiting clearance from operations. Please remain patient." Derrick looked up, meeting the eyes of the captain through the open cockpit door. He saw fear there, but also something else, a question, maybe even a plea. The phone in Derrick's pocket vibrated. He pulled it out slowly. The secure line displayed a single name, Margaret Hayes. He answered, voice steady, "Margaret." A hush fell across the cabin. Valerie's lips parted. Thomas froze mid-step. Passengers leaned in, realizing they were listening not to a confrontation, but to a negotiation that could change everything. "Derrick." Margaret's voice came, clipped but edged with urgency. "You've made your point. The system is down nationwide. Flights are grounded. I need you to release it." He didn't raise his voice. "I didn't start this. Margaret, your people did when they chose to see me as a threat instead of a customer. When they labeled me non-compliant for sitting in the seat I paid for." Margaret exhaled hard. "I understand, but shutting down our booking system has ripple effects. Thousands of passengers are stranded. The press is circling. You're punishing people who had nothing to do with this." Derrick let the silence stretch before answering. "I'm not punishing passengers. I'm showing you the cost of dismissing dignity. If your system can't recognize humanity, it doesn't deserve to function." Amira whispered into her phone. "Did you hear that he's talking to the CEO right now? This is history." Comments surged. "Don't back down. We stand with you. She has to listen." Margaret's voice softened, almost pleading. "What do you want, Derrick?" That was the question he had been waiting for. He looked around the cabin, the nervous faces, the live stream glowing in Amira's hand, Richard's wrinkled brow furrowed with shame. Then he spoke slowly, carefully. "I want more than an apology. I want systemic change. Mandatory anti-bias training for every crew member. Independent reporting channels for passengers. Real accountability, not just PR spin. And I want your commitment to it, public and immediate." Margaret hesitated. "That's a tall order. Not as tall as expecting people to endure humiliation at 30,000 feet." Derrick replied. A murmur of agreement rippled through the cabin. Even those who had remained silent now nodded subtly, recognizing the truth in his words. Margaret sighed. "If I agree, will you restore the system?" Derrick's eyes flickered with a quiet flame. "If you commit, on record, right now, not in a press release tomorrow, now." The line went quiet. The whole cabin held its breath. Then Margaret spoke, her voice carrying both resignation and resolve. "Fine. I'll do it. Put me on speaker." Derrick tapped his phone, setting it on the armrest. Her voice filled the cabin. "This is Margaret Hayes, CEO of Redwood Air. Effective immediately. We are implementing mandatory anti-bias training, independent oversight, and accountability measures for all staff. This will not be another forgotten promise." Gasps, whispers, and even a few claps echoed through the cabin. Amira's phone shook slightly as her hand trembled with excitement. "You heard it here? Live? She just said it. It's real." Derrick closed his notebook. "That's a start," he said calmly. He pressed a command on his device. Across the nation, screens flickered back to life. Boarding systems restarted. The paralyzed machine began to breathe again. Valerie sagged against the galley wall, eyes hollow. Thomas sat heavily in a jump seat, burying his face in his hands. Richard Moore whispered, almost reverently, "One man, 25 minutes." And the whole country stopped. Derrick leaned back, eyes closing briefly. For him, it wasn't triumph. It was necessary correction. And it had come at a cost, the burden of carrying what should never have been placed on his shoulders. But as the cabin filled with the quiet buzz of restored systems and the louder buzz of renewed hope, Derrick knew this moment would not vanish like so many others. This time, the nation had taken notice. News travels fast. But that night, it moved at lightning speed. Within minutes of Margaret Hayes's voice echoing through the cabin, Amira's livestream had exploded beyond 50,000. By the time Derrick closed his notebook, the number had soared past 80, on couches in Atlanta, in coffee shops in Portland, in break rooms in Detroit. People stopped what they were doing to watch a grainy phone screen showing a black man seated quietly in first class, refusing to surrender dignity. Cable news producers scrambled, cutting into programming with banners "Redwood Air grounded nationwide." Anchors leaned forward at their desks, voices urgent. "We're following breaking news tonight. A passenger identified as tech CEO Derrick Caldwell has reportedly triggered a shutdown of Redwood's entire booking system after being denied his paid seat." Clips from Amira's stream replayed Valerie snapping, Thomas labeling him non-compliant, the frozen stares when Derrick invoked Sentinel Protocol. The public saw not just confrontation, but contrast. One man calm, steady, writing in a notebook, while an entire corporate machine unraveled. In the cabin, passengers scrolled through feeds, realization dawning. A young woman gasped softly, "We're trending. Caldwell Protocol is everywhere." Valerie buried her face in her hands, whispering, "God, what have we done?" Thomas slumped lower, his radio useless at his side. Richard Moore, who had once dismissed it all as fuss, stared at his phone. His grandchildren had texted already. "Grandpa, you're on TikTok." His throat tightened with something he couldn't name shame. Maybe, but also the chance to do better than silence. Amira whispered, still streaming, "This isn't just a flight anymore. This is the whole country asking what justice looks like at 30,000 feet. Derrick said little. He let the storm swirl outside of him. Inside, his thoughts returned to his father, to long nights in a cramped house on the south side of Cleveland, to lessons about patience and fire. His father had always said, "Power is loud until you meet someone who doesn't need to shout." Tonight, Derrick finally understood. The captain appeared at the curtain, his face pale but respectful. He walked slowly down the aisle until he reached Derrick's seat. Lowering his voice, he said, "Mr. Caldwell, I want to thank you. I don't know what this means for me, but I know you forced something to break that needed breaking." The words weren't grand, but they mattered. They cracked open the tight coil of tension that had gripped the cabin for nearly an hour. Amira's viewers flooded the chat. Respect to the captain. This is leadership. Accountability starts small. Derrick nodded once. Thank you for seeing. The captain straightened, turned, and returned to the cockpit. Meanwhile, in Chicago, Margaret Hayes faced her board. The directors were furious about the shutdown, about the spectacle, about the promises she had just made live on a passenger's phone. "You capitulated on record." One barked. Margaret snapped back. "I prevented a disaster from becoming a collapse. You think hiding behind PR statements would have worked when half the country was watching in real time. They had no answer. By midnight, hashtags surged. Fly with dignity. Caldwell Protocol. Never again at 30 co. Commentators debated whether Derrick was a hero or a menace, but the footage spoke louder than the arguments. A black man had been denied his seat. 25 minutes later, he shut down a national carrier system until justice was promised. On the plane, the tension had softened into weary silence. Some passengers slept against windows. Others scrolled endlessly, unable to look away from the digital tidal wave they were now part of. Amira ended her stream at last. Lowering the phone with trembling hands, she turned to Derrick. "They're saying you changed everything tonight." He gave a faint smile, tired but resolute. "One night doesn't change everything, but it can open a door. Whether people walk through it, that's the real test." Richard cleared his throat. His voice was rough, but clear. "I misjudged you, sir. I let my eyes see what they wanted, not what was true. I'm sorry." Derrick looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Acknowledgement is a start. Keep walking past it." The older man swallowed, eyes damp. For the first time in years, he felt not older, but teachable. Valerie hadn't moved from the galley. When she finally spoke, it was to no one in particular. "I thought I was enforcing order, but I see now I was protecting a lie, and it cost us more than I can measure." Her voice cracked. No one answered, but the silence around her was not cruel. It was recognition. Outside the windows, the lights of Oakland shimmered as the aircraft remained at the gate, still unboarded, still waiting. In living rooms across America, people felt something stir, a mix of anger, relief, and, against all odds, hope. If dignity could be defended in a narrow cabin, maybe it could be defended elsewhere too. As Derrick leaned his head back, eyes closing briefly, he thought not of victory, but of burden. Carrying dignity into battle was heavy, but seeing people wake, even just a few, made the weight bearable, and far beyond the cabin walls, the world was still listening. By dawn, Redwood Air had become more than an airline story. It was America's story. On morning news shows, anchors sat with papers scattered on their desks, voices urgent but hushed. What began as a seat dispute has turned into a national reckoning. Tech leader Derrick Caldwell grounded Redwood Air's booking system for 25 minutes last night after being denied his paid seat. The incident, live-streamed by passenger Amira Lopez, has sparked a wave of reaction across the country. Clips played again and again, Valerie's sharp tone, Thomas's threat of non-compliance, Derrick's calm voice invoking Sentinel Protocol. People at home didn't just see a black CEO. They saw their own frustrations, moments of being dismissed, belittled, or told they didn't belong reflected back to them. At a diner in Baltimore, truck drivers leaned over steaming mugs of coffee, watching the overhead television. One shook his head. Man just wanted the seat he paid for. Ended up stopping the whole airline. Can't say I blame him. In a school teacher's lounge in Denver, a woman scrolled her phone between classes. She whispered to her colleague, "It's not about him being rich. It's about being human." That's what people are missing. At a subway stop in Queens, a teenage boy held up his phone to show his friends the trending clip. "Look, that's power. Not fists, not yelling, just sitting down and saying no." The hashtag, Toachi, Fly with Dignity, had crossed 1 million posts. Artists sketched portraits of Derrick in seat 2A. Writers drafted essays overnight about systemic bias in everyday spaces. Civil rights groups issued statements, praising his restraint and amplifying his demands. Back on the plane, The passengers were still processing what they had witnessed. Some scrolled, stunned that their faces were now woven into a national broadcast. Others avoided eye contact, unsettled by their own earlier silence. Richard Moore couldn't shake the weight of his grandchildren's texts. "Grandpa, we saw you. Why didn't you say something sooner?" The words pressed harder than any news headline. He sat with his notebook open now, scribbling thoughts like confessions. Perhaps tomorrow he would call them, admit he had failed in that moment, but promised to do better. Perhaps. Amira's phone buzzed relentlessly with requests from networks and podcasts. She declined them all for now. "To Derrick," she said quietly. "They all want interviews. But the story isn't mine. It's yours." Derrick shook his head gently. "It isn't mine alone. It belongs to everyone who's been told to wait, to step aside, to be invisible. You gave them a window." She swallowed hard, moved more than she expected. "I just hit record." "You did more than that," Derrick said softly. "You refused to look away. In Chicago." Margaret Hayes faced her board again. Overnight, stock analysts had called, warning of turbulence. Yet public sentiment was shifting fast. The CEO who had capitulated was now being described as the leader who acted before collapse. Commentators debated, had Redwood Air stumbled into its reckoning, or had it been dragged there by force? Margaret stared out her office window at the skyline. She knew one thing: the company's survival depended on proving the promises she had made in desperation were real. Meanwhile, civil rights attorney Angela Ford stood outside a courthouse in Atlanta, addressing cameras. What happened last night wasn't just about air travel. It was about who gets to claim space in America without being questioned. Mr. Caldwell's actions pulled back the curtain on systemic bias. Now the question is, what will we do with what we saw inside the cabin? Valerie sat in the galley, silent. Her uniform, once a symbol of control, felt like a costume too tight to wear. She replayed every word she had spoken, every glance she had cast at Derrick, and felt the weight of regret pressing down. She had wanted to appear strong, to enforce order, but all she had done was expose her fear. Thomas remained beside her, staring at his useless radio. He muttered once, to no one, "All I wanted was a smooth departure." His voice cracked. Smooth departures, he realized, had often meant ignoring the storm beneath. The captain returned briefly to the cabin, speaking to the passengers with measured calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, operations have resumed. We'll be departing shortly. Thank you for your patience." His gaze flickered toward Derrick, gratitude unspoken but clear. Derrick nodded slightly, acknowledging without fanfare. As the engines rumbled to life, a strange unity filled the cabin. Strangers who had been silent witnesses now knew they were part of something larger. They would leave this flight with stories to tell, not just of delay, but of dignity. And across America, conversations sparked in kitchens, offices, and barbershops. Parents explained to children why a man sitting in his rightful seat mattered. Workers spoke about times they'd swallowed disrespect to keep a job. Ministers prepared sermons about courage without violence. Not everyone agreed, of course. Online threads bristled with anger. He endangered the system. He overreached. He should have just moved. But even those arguments revealed a deeper shift. The incident was impossible to ignore. For Derrick, it wasn't about agreement or praise. As the plane finally pushed back from the gate, he closed his eyes briefly. He felt both heavier and lighter, heavier from the burden of being seen as symbol rather than man, lighter from knowing silence had been broken. He thought again of his father's words. Make sure they can't ignore you. Last night, they hadn't, and for the first time, Derrick wondered if maybe the world was ready not just to see, but to change. The engines roared, pushing the aircraft down the runway. Passengers pressed back into their seats as the jet lifted into the dark sky, Oakland shrinking below into a web of lights. The climb felt different tonight. Every soul aboard carried the weight of what they had witnessed, but also the quiet relief of forward motion. Derrick sat in 2A, window shade lifted. He watched the glow of the bay recede into black ocean. For a brief moment, the hum of the engines was almost soothing. After hours of confrontation, silence felt like a gift. Amira tucked her phone into her bag, her first real pause since hitting record. She leaned across the aisle. Are you okay? Derrick's eyes stayed on the window. I'm tired, he admitted, but I'm used to that kind of tired. The kind that doesn't leave when you sleep. Amira didn't press. She understood, maybe not fully, but enough. Richard Moore sat 2 rows back, hands folded. He had decided not to text his grandchildren yet. Instead, he scribbled again in his notebook. This time, the words were less confession and more promise. Don't let silence make you complicit. Speak, even when it's uncomfortable. Valerie remained in the galley, staring at the stainless steel counter, replaying every second. She could still hear her own voice echoing in her ears, sharp, defensive, blind. For years she had told herself she was just following policy, but tonight she saw how policy had been amassed for prejudice, and now she wondered if forgiveness could ever reach her. Thomas sat near her, but they did not speak. He clutched his useless radio like a relic of authority already gone. His thoughts spiraled. Would he still have a job tomorrow? Would his name appear in headlines as the man who branded Derrick non-compliant? The captain's voice broke the cabin hush. We've reached cruising altitude. You may use approved devices. His tone was steadier now, perhaps bolstered by the knowledge that dignity had been defended on his watch, not crushed. Some passengers exhaled deeply, the first real breath since boarding. Others scrolled their feeds, seeing themselves reflected across a nation. The cabin lights dimmed, washing everything in soft blue. Derrick leaned back, closing his notebook. For the first time, he allowed himself to reflect inward rather than outward. He thought of his father again, but also his mother, her gentle warnings about carrying too much weight alone. Even a strong back can break. Derrick. She had said that often. Tonight, he felt the truth of it. He whispered almost to himself. What happens after the applause fades? Amira overheard. Then you keep walking, and the rest of us, we try to walk with you. Her words landed gently, like a promise he didn't know he needed. Cabin service resumed, but differently. A junior attendant, Mia Torres, approached cautiously with a bottle of water. Her hands trembled as she placed it on Derrick's tray table. Sir, I just want to say, I saw everything. And I'm sorry for how it began. It wasn't right. Derrick met her eyes. She couldn't have been more than 24. Fear mingled with sincerity in her gaze. He gave a small nod. Thank you for saying so. Mia exhaled, shoulders loosening. It was a small exchange, but in a night of grand gestures and system-shaking commands, it mattered. Healing often began in whispers. Hours passed. The cabin grew quieter, passengers drifting into uneasy sleep. The hum of engines filled the silence. Derrick remained awake, eyes on the darkness beyond the window. He thought about power, not the kind that grounded airlines, but the kind that lived in the simple act of refusing to be erased. He thought about his father's calloused hands, his mother's tired smile, and the generations before him who had no Sentinel Protocol to call upon, only courage to stand or sit or walk where they were told not to. And he wondered if tonight honored them, or if it was only another burden placed on their descendants. Richard rose quietly, walking down the aisle. He stopped by Derrick's seat, voice low. "I know I can't undo the way I looked at you when you boarded, but I need to say it, face to face. I was wrong. You deserve better. All of us do." Derrick studied him a moment, then extended his hand. Richard clasped it, rough with age, but firm with sincerity. The moment was brief, but profound in acknowledgement that even entrenched prejudice could bend when confronted with truth. Behind them, Amira watched, her eyes glistening. She whispered into her phone's notes app, typing a line she knew she'd share later. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's two men shaking hands at 30,000 feet. Valerie remained in the galley, unseen, her shoulders shaking silently. Guilt was heavy, but guilt could also be a beginning if she let it. She didn't know yet if she would. As dawn approached, the cabin stirred again. The captain announced their descent into New York. Passengers adjusted, collected belongings, braced for the return to Earth. Derrick closed his eyes for one last moment of stillness. When the wheels touched down, the world would demand more statements, interviews, decisions. But here, at 30,000 feet, he had allowed himself to be simply a man, not a symbol, not a weapon, just a man insisting on dignity. And that, he thought, was enough. The wheels screeched against the tarmac at John F. Kennedy International Airport. A ripple of relief swept through the cabin, but underneath it ran a current of tension, like an orchestra holding its final note. The seatbelt sign chimed off, and people began shifting, collecting bags, stretching stiff legs. Derrick Caldwell remained still. He looked down at his hands folded neatly in his lap, the same hands that had tapped the quiet code into his phone less than 3 hours ago. 25 minutes that had altered not just a flight, but perhaps an entire airline. The intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to New York. Local time is 6:23 at TAI. On behalf of the crew, thank you for choosing Redwood Air." The captain's voice carried calm, but the cabin knew this was no ordinary arrival. As passengers stood, the first murmurs rose, phones lit up, screens reflected headlines already spreading. Black CEO denied first-class shutdown airline booking system. Mid-flight, hashtags scrolled like neon tickers. Justice at 30K feet. Caldwell Protocol. Fly with dignity. Amira Lopez leaned across the aisle. "They're waiting for you out there," she whispered. Her phone buzzed nonstop, messages flooding from colleagues and followers. The whole country saw what happened. Derrick gave the faintest smile. Not of pride, but of acknowledgement. I suppose silence isn't an option anymore. In row 4. Richard Moore adjusted his blazer, glancing nervously toward the windows where the dawn light glimmered on the terminal glass. He had lived through marches, through reckonings, through the turning of public tides. He knew what awaited outside cameras, questions, judgment, and for once he felt ready not to hide. Valerie Keene, still in uniform, stood frozen near the galley. Her hands twisted the hem of her jacket. Every instinct urged her to vanish through a side door, to escape the spotlight, but something deeper whispered that running would only confirm guilt. She took a slow breath. She had never been more terrified and never more certain that she had to face what came. The cabin door clicked open. Morning air swept in, carrying the metallic scent of jet fuel and the faint sweetness of brewed coffee drifting from the terminal. Security agents stepped aboard first, 2 men in dark suits. Their eyes scanned quickly. Landing on Derrick, one nodded. "Mr. Caldwell, we'll escort you through." Passengers didn't move. Instead, they parted, creating a path. No one spoke, but their silence was a statement they knew history was walking down that aisle. Derrick rose slowly, adjusting his suit jacket. The same navy fabric wrinkled now from hours of sitting, but carrying the dignity of his presence. He picked up his leather briefcase, worn at the edges from years of use, and stepped into the aisle. Each step felt heavier. He caught glimpses of faces, some admiring, some solemn, some apologetic. Amira's eyes glistened as she recorded quietly. Richard gave a nod, a silent benediction. As Derrick reached the doorway, Valerie found her voice. "Mr. Caldwell." He paused, turned. Her throat tightened. The words barely emerged. "I was wrong. No protocol excuses what I did. I hope one day I can prove I've learned from this." The cabin stilled. Passengers leaned in, sensing the fragile weight of the moment. Derrick studied her, his gaze neither cruel nor indulgent, simply steady. "Growth begins with admitting the harm," he said softly. "The rest is in what you do tomorrow." Her eyes brimmed, but she nodded. And then he stepped into the jet bridge. The light outside was blinding. Dozens of cameras clicked instantly, microphones thrust forward, voices overlapping in chaotic waves. "Mr. Caldwell, why did you shut down the system? Was this about power or principle? What do you want from Redwood Air? Do you plan to sue?" The security agents flanked him, guiding him toward a cordoned path. Reporters shouted his name like an anthem and an accusation. Travelers in the terminal stopped. Phones raised high. Screens displayed live coverage from news networks already running his image side by side with headlines. Derrick did not answer yet. His pace was measured, each step deliberate. He had learned long ago that silence could speak louder than sound. When he reached the terminal's center atrium, he finally paused. He turned slowly, facing the sea of cameras. The buzz quieted, as though the air itself leaned in. His voice, when it came, was calm but resonant. "I didn't come here seeking a stage. I came here seeking a seat I had already paid for. A seat denied, not by policy, but by prejudice." The crowd hushed further. Even the clicking slowed. For 25 minutes, I did what generations before me could not. I used the tools at my disposal to say, "No more." I shut down a booking system. But what really needs to be shut down is the mindset that sees dignity as optional. Gas and murmurs rippled. Screens replayed his words in bold captions. "This is not about me alone. It's about every traveler who has ever been told they don't belong. It's about my father, who cleaned hangars in Detroit and dreamed that one day his son might fly in the seats he could never afford. It's about my mother, who told me, even a strong back can break if it carries too much alone." His tone softened. "I carried tonight not just for myself, but for those before me, and for those who come after." Applause broke out, first scattered, then swelling until the atrium thundered with it. Travelers clapped, some cheered, others wiped their eyes. Reporters pressed forward with new questions. "What now? Mr. Caldwell, what do you want Redwood Air to do?" Derrick straightened. "3 things: accountability, transparency, and transformation. Those who made tonight possible must answer for their actions. This airline must commit to clear, independent oversight. And together, We must ensure this never happens again. Not here. Not anywhere. The crowd erupted again, not with questions, but with affirmation. Behind the cordon. Valerie watched from the doorway, tears streaking her face. Thomas Green stood beside her, pale and silent, already realizing his career had ended in that speech. Amira, still recording, whispered to herself, "This is history." Richard Moore, leaning on his cane, stepped closer, catching Derrick's eye from a distance. Derrick nodded once, acknowledging not just the man, but the generations he represented. Security ushered him forward again, guiding him toward waiting black SUVs outside. But the echoes of applause followed him, spilling across the terminal, captured by every phone and every feed. Outside, the dawn had broken fully. The New York skyline glowed in the distance, tall and unyielding, yet softened by the rising sun. Derrick paused one last time before stepping into the car. He whispered, almost to himself, "Let the wait mean something." And then the door closed, carrying him into the next battle. The black SUVs rolled through Manhattan's early morning streets, headlights cutting through the thinning fog. Derrick Caldwell sat in the back, head resting lightly against the cool window. New York bustled awake outside, but inside the car the silence was heavy, broken only by the occasional murmur from his security detail over radios. His phone buzzed endlessly. Calls from reporters, messages from colleagues, notifications from social media exploding with his name. He ignored them all. For now, quiet mattered more than noise. By 7:15 m.m., the convoy pulled into the glass tower of Redwood Air's corporate headquarters. The building gleamed, 35 stories of steel and ambition. Today, it felt less like a fortress and more like a witness box. Inside, the boardroom was already tense. Redwood's CEO, Harvey Langston, a tall man in his late 50s with a sharp gray suit and sharper eyes, stood at the head of the long mahogany table. Around him sat directors, legal advisors, and communications chiefs. Screens on the wall blazed with news coverage, Derrick's face frozen mid-speech, headlines scrolling, hashtags pulsing. "Gentlemen, ladies," Harvey said, voice taut, "we're in a crisis. System shut down, passenger humiliation, national outrage. If we don't get ahead of this, Redwood collapses." One director, a silver-haired man named Philip Reynolds, tapped his pen nervously. "Our stock is already tumbling. We've lost nearly 6% in pre-market. If this continues, investors will flee." Another, younger director, Monica Wu, leaned forward. "This isn't just about markets. It's about credibility. Millions watched us deny a black man his seat. And not just any man, Derrick Caldwell." The room murmured. They all knew who he was. CEO of Caldwell Systems, architect of the Sentinel network that handled booking and security for nearly half the airlines in North America. A man with leverage, unlike any passenger in history. The doors opened. Derrick stepped in, flanked by 2 aides. The room stilled. For once. Harvey Langston looked unsettled. "Mr. Caldwell," Harvey said, forcing composure. "Thank you for coming. Let's talk about how we can resolve this." Derrick moved to the opposite end of the table, placing his worn briefcase down with deliberate care. He didn't sit immediately. His eyes swept the room, taking in faces, some guilty, some defensive, some calculating. Finally, he sat. His voice, calm but unyielding, filled the space. Resolve. This isn't a public relations problem you can patch with a press release. This is a systemic rot, and I intend to make sure it's addressed. Harvey cleared his throat. "We're prepared to issue an apology, public, heartfelt. Valerie Keene will be suspended pending investigation. We'll compensate you personally for the distress. Derrick's gaze sharpened. Compensation doesn't repair dignity, and an apology without action is theater. Silence. Monica Wu broke it. What do you propose, Mr. Caldwell? He leaned forward, fingers steepled. 3 commitments. First, independent oversight. Not your HR department sweeping complaints under the rug. An external body with authority to investigate bias and discrimination. Murmurs spread. Philip Reynolds frowned. That's a heavy precedent. Derrick ignored him. Second, mandatory training. Not a one-day workshop, but a sustained program designed with civil rights leaders, ensuring your staff understands what respect means at 30,000 feet. Harvey's jaw tightened. And the third, Derrick's voice dropped slightly, making the room lean in. Transparency. A passenger-driven reporting system, visible in real time. If someone is mistreated, the world doesn't wait 6 months for a buried report. The data speaks immediately. The room erupted with objections. That could damage brand trust. It exposes us legally. Competitors will weaponize it. Derrick let them finish, then spoke over the noise. You're worried about exposure. The exposure has already happened. Millions saw it last night. Your brand isn't at risk because of my demands. It's at risk because of your silence. Harvey slammed his palm on the table. And if we refuse, Derrick didn't flinch, then Sentinel will refuse Redwood. The system you depend on to book tickets, process upgrades, manage flights, it will go dark. Not for 25 minutes, for as long as it takes. A chill swept the room. They knew he wasn't bluffing. The shutdown on Flight 118 had proven that. Philip's voice cracked. That would cripple us. Derrick's tone remained even. Then fix the disease before it kills you. The room fell into uneasy silence. Directors glanced at one another, weighing fear against pride, liability against survival. Finally, Monica Wu spoke firmly. I support his plan. If we don't adapt, we die. Public trust is already bleeding. This is the only way forward. One by one. Others nodded, reluctant at first, then resigned. All eyes turned to Harvey. His face was tight, eyes calculating, but even he knew the tide. He exhaled slowly. Very well. Redwood will accept your terms. Derrick gave a single nod. Then we moved forward, not as enemies, but as proof that accountability is possible. The meeting adjourned, but the weight of it lingered in every breath. As Derrick left the boardroom, Amira, who had been allowed to observe as press, caught his eye. That wasn't negotiation, she said softly. That was surgery. He gave a tired smile. Sometimes the wound has to be cut open before it can heal. In the hallway. Valerie waited, her uniform wrinkled, eyes red from hours of silent reflection. She looked at him, then at the floor. I know I'm the face of this mess, but I want to learn. If there's a chance to help change this instead of just being remembered for it. Derrick studied her, his expression unreadable. Finally, he said, change isn't about what you say in this hallway. It's about the choices you'll make when nobody is watching. Prove it there. She nodded, tears welling again. As he walked toward the exit, Derrick's phone buzzed with a new notification. News anchors replayed his speech at JFK. Social feeds exploded with clips from the boardroom leaked within minutes. Hashtags multiplied. But he ignored them all. For Derrick, the fight was never about viral fame. It was about a seat, one seat, and the principle that dignity should never be negotiable. And though the battle was far from over, tonight had carved a crack in the armor of silence. By midday, The story had spread beyond airports and boardrooms. It pulsed across televisions in diners, in hospital waiting rooms, in barbershops, in classrooms. People who had never stepped foot on an airplane debated it as if they had been on Flight 118 themselves. Cable news replayed Derrick Caldwell's words in endless loops. Dignity should never be negotiable. On talk radio, callers argued passionately, some praising his restraint and courage, others questioning the scope of his power to shut down an airline's booking system. At a cafe in Atlanta, 2 young law students hunched over laptops, drafting think pieces about corporate accountability. In Detroit, an older man watching from his living room murmured, "That's Caldwell's boy. I knew his daddy. Lord, he'd be proud." Twitter feeds burst with hashtags, many already trending worldwide. Caldwell Protocol became shorthand for any decisive stand against discrimination. Memes circulated, some solemn, others satirical, capturing the tension of a man denied a seat only to wield the weight of a system against the very company that wronged him. For Derrick, the noise was deafening. He sat in a modest Manhattan hotel suite, curtains drawn against the afternoon sun. His aides clustered in the next room, fielding calls from journalists, senators, civil rights leaders. He sat alone on the edge of the bed, shoes off, staring at the carpet. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind exhaustion that felt bone deep. He thought of his mother's warning again. Even a strong back can break if it carries too much alone. A soft knock. Amira Lopez peeked in, phone in hand. "You need to see this." Derrick shook his head. "Later." "No," she said gently but firmly. "Now." She handed him the phone. On the screen was a clip not of his speech, but of Richard Moore. The older man stood outside JFK, speaking to a small group of reporters who had recognized him. "I was on that flight," Richard said, voice quivering but clear. "I saw my own prejudice reflected in the way I looked at him when he boarded. And I'm ashamed. But I'm also grateful, because he gave me a chance to change before it was too late. If he could carry himself with that much grace after what we put him through, the least I can do is admit my fault. We all need to do better." The video had already been shared millions of times. Comments filled the feed, some praising Richard's honesty, others confessing similar moments of self-reflection. Derrick handed the phone back slowly. His voice was quiet. Maybe that's the real victory. Not the shutdown, not the headlines, just one man facing himself. Amira smiled softly, and through him, millions more. Meanwhile, inside Redwood's headquarters, the ripple effects deepened. Monica Wu convened an emergency task force to draft the independent oversight plan Derrick demanded. She pushed for transparency measures even more aggressive than he had outlined, knowing the only way to rebuild trust was through radical openness. Harvey Langston, though publicly compliant, seethed privately. He paced his office, railing to Philip Reynolds. "He humiliated us. On our own stage. We can't let him dictate Redwood's future." Philip, ever cautious, replied, "He already has. If we resist, we implode. If we cooperate, at least we survive." For Valerie Keene, the day unfolded differently. She sat alone in her apartment, blinds half closed, scrolling through messages, some supportive, many brutal. Strangers called her every name imaginable. Her employer hadn't yet decided her fate. For the first time in her career, she felt stripped bare, no protocol to hide behind. She whispered to herself, "What do I do now?" The silence answered back, demanding she become someone new or remain the person who boarded Flight 118? Across the country, families debated at dinner tables. Some parents told children the story as a warning, others as an inspiration. Teachers reshaped lesson plans overnight to discuss dignity, bias, and accountability. And yet, not all reactions were supportive. On certain networks, pundits framed Derrick as a man who had weaponized his wealth and influence. Anonymous commentators flooded forums with vitriol. The nation was divided, but the division only amplified the reach of his message. By evening, Derrick agreed to one interview, just one. He sat across from a veteran journalist in a quiet studio. Lights soft, atmosphere almost confessional. "Mr. Caldwell," the journalist began, "you could have handled this privately. Why choose such a public path?" Derrick leaned back, eyes steady. "Because dignity denied in public must be restored in public. Silence would have kept me comfortable, but it would have left the system unchanged. And I didn't endure for comfort." The interviewer nodded. "Some say you overreached, that shutting down a booking system was too extreme." Derrick's voice remained calm. Extreme is being humiliated for something as simple as sitting in the seat you paid for. Extreme is generations of travelers told, in small and large ways, that they don't belong. What I did wasn't extreme. It was proportionate. The clip aired within the hour. By midnight, it had been viewed over 30 million times. But the most powerful response didn't come from pundits or politicians. It came from Jamal, a 15-year-old high school sophomore in Newark. He recorded a shaky video on his phone, speaking from his bedroom. "I've been followed in stores. I've been told I looked like I didn't belong in places I was invited. Watching Derrick Caldwell, it felt like watching my future fight back. He didn't yell. He didn't throw punches. He just said no. And that gave me hope that I can say no too." The video went viral within hours. Teachers showed it in classrooms. Civil rights groups shared it as a rallying cry. When Derrick finally saw it, long past midnight, he sat in silence. His throat tightened. He whispered into the dark room, "That's why. Outside, New York never slept." Billboards flashed with headlines. Taxis blared horns. And somewhere across the Hudson, a boy who had just found his voice lay awake, dreaming bigger because a man on a plane had refused to surrender a seat. 2 weeks later, Washington, D.C. wore its usual cloak of gray sky and restless energy. Inside the Capitol, the oak-paneled chamber buzzed with anticipation. Reporters filled every seat along the back wall, cameras poised. Senators shuffled thick folders of notes. Staffers whispered urgently. At the center sat Derrick Caldwell. His navy suit was pressed, his tie a muted burgundy. He looked composed, but his fingers tapped lightly on the table, a rhythm only he could hear. The committee chair, Senator Margaret Hensley, rapped her gavel. "This hearing of the Senate Committee on Transportation and Civil Rights will come to order. Today, we address the events of Flight 118 Redwood Air and the broader issue of discrimination in air travel." Her words carried across the chamber. "We are honored to have Mr. Derrick Caldwell here, a central figure in this case. Mr. Caldwell, thank you for appearing." Derrick leaned toward the microphone. "Thank you, Senator. I didn't seek this stage, but I understand why I'm here." The first questions came quickly. Senator Jacobs, blunt and skeptical, leaned forward. "Mr. Caldwell, let's begin with your decision to shut down Redwood's booking system. Critics argue you abused your position, that you escalated a personal incident into a national crisis. What do you say to that?" Derrick's tone was calm, unhurried. "Senator, I didn't shut down a system for attention. I invoked a safeguard built into Sentinel for cases of systemic breach. That breach was not just technological, but human. I was denied a seat I had paid for, not because of error, but because of bias. The system's integrity includes human dignity. When that failed, the shutdown was proportionate. The chamber hushed. Even Jacobs paused, taken aback by the measured conviction. Senator Elena Ruiz, a civil rights advocate, picked up next. Mr. Caldwell, beyond your personal experience, what changes do you believe are necessary? Industry-wide? He met her eyes directly. 3 pillars. Senator, independent oversight so no airline polices itself into complacency. Transparent reporting system so passengers' voices are seen, not buried. And sustained training that goes beyond checkboxes and reaches hearts. If dignity can be denied at 30,000 feet, then no traveler is safe. Applause broke briefly from the gallery before the gavel struck again. As testimony continued, witnesses followed. Amira Lopez recounted her recordings. Richard Moore, cane in hand, admitted his prejudice before millions. I thought I was past all that, he said, voice trembling, but I saw myself fail in real time. And thanks to Mr. Caldwell, I saw a chance to change. His words brought silence, then soft murmurs of approval. Valerie Keene sat stiffly when called. Her statement was halting, her voice raw. I enforced policy as I understood it, but I see now I used it as armor for my bias. I humiliated a man who deserved respect. I can't undo it, but I can commit to never hiding behind protocol again. Some senators shifted uncomfortably, but others nodded at the rare candor. By late afternoon, after hours of testimony, Senator Hensley delivered closing remarks. This is not about one flight. It's about whether America will allow dignity to remain optional in our skies. Mr. Caldwell, you've reminded us of what accountability can look like. Outside, the Capitol steps swarmed with reporters. Microphones and cameras chased Derrick as he emerged. He raised a hand, not to silence, but to steady. My seat on Flight 118 was small, he said, but it carried a weight bigger than me. Today isn't about Derrick Caldwell versus Redwood Air. It's about every passenger who's ever been told, in words or in silence, that they don't belong. That ends when we say it ends. The crowd erupted. Some chanted his name. Others simply recorded, eyes wide, knowing they were witnessing a turning point. That night, alone in his Deitch hotel room, Derrick finally exhaled. He loosened his tie, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared out at the Capitol dome, glowing in the distance. He thought of Jamal's video, of Richard's confession, of Valerie's tears. His phone buzzed. A message from Monica Wu. The reforms are already being drafted. You changed more than Redwood today. You shifted the ground for the whole industry. He set the phone down. For once, he didn't reply. Instead, he whispered into the empty room, let it last. For beneath the headlines, beneath the applause, he carried the quiet knowledge that change was fragile, and that tomorrow he would have to fight again. But tonight, at least, he allowed himself a moment of hope. 6 months later, spring sunlight spilled through the glass atrium of Chicago's new Aviation Diversity Summit. Banners hung from the rafters. Dignity in the skies, accountability on the ground. Airline executives, civil rights leaders, students, and reporters filled the hall, their voices weaving into a constant hum of anticipation. On the main stage, a wide semicircle of chairs faced the crowd. At the center sat Derrick Caldwell. His presence alone hushed the room. He had become more than a CEO. He was now a symbol, though he never asked to be one. The moderator, a well-known journalist, leaned forward. "Mr. Caldwell, since Flight 118, we've seen sweeping reforms, independent oversight across multiple airlines, transparent reporting dashboards, new training standards. Passenger complaints of discrimination are down 30%. What do you make of this moment?" Derrick's gaze moved across the audience, faces young and old, diverse, hopeful. His voice was steady but warm. Change is never instant, and it's never perfect, but it begins the moment silence is broken. 6 months ago, one seat on one flight became a mirror for an industry. Today, we're not finished, but we are further than we were. Applause swelled. From the front row, Amira Lopez raised her phone, capturing the moment live, her followers now numbered in the millions, many drawn to her unflinching coverage of that night. She had gone from passenger to journalist overnight, but her mission remained clear: amplify truth. Richard Moore sat nearby, cane across his knees. His hair seemed whiter, his shoulders more stooped, but his eyes carried a brightness he hadn't shown in years. He had spent the months since speaking at schools, churches, and town halls, telling his story of prejudice faced and prejudice admitted. Each time, he ended with the same line: "If an old man like me can change, what's stopping you?" Valerie Keene was there too, no longer in uniform. She now worked with a nonprofit dedicated to anti-bias training for frontline service workers. Her journey hadn't been easy: public criticism, nights of shame, the slow rebuilding of trust. But today, she sat quietly in the audience, ready to listen rather than defend. On stage, Derrick continued, "For me, the seat was never just about comfort. It was about belonging. My father scrubbed airplane hangars in Detroit, inhaling fumes while dreaming of skies he could never afford. My mother told me, a strong back can break if it carries too much alone. That night, I carried more than myself, but here," he gestured to the hall, "here I see I don't carry it alone anymore." The hall rose in applause. Some stood, clapping. Others wiped away tears. Cameras flashed like bursts of lightning. But Derrick's mind was already drifting. Later, after the panels and press, he slipped outside to the quiet of the riverside walkway. The water shimmered in the fading afternoon light. For the first time in months, no microphones chased him, no boardroom demanded him, just the sound of water against stone. He sat on a bench, loosening his tie. The memory of Flight 118 still returned at night, the sting of Valerie's voice, the heat of humiliation, the press of every eye watching. But with it came other images: Richard's handshake at 30,000 feet, Jamal's trembling voice in his bedroom video, Valerie's whispered apology, and the thought lingered. Maybe healing wasn't about erasing wounds. Maybe it was about what grew around them. As if on cue, his phone buzzed. A message from Jamal, the teenager from Newark. "Got my acceptance letter. Berklee College of Music. Thank you for teaching me not to sit quiet." Derrick's chest tightened. He typed back simply, "Proud of you. Keep playing." Footsteps approached. Amira joined him, slipping her phone into her jacket pocket. "You disappeared," she teased. "Just needed a quieter seat," Derrick said with a faint smile. They sat in silence a moment, watching the river. Then Amira asked softly, "Do you ever regret it?" Triggering the shutdown, carrying all this weight, Derrick thought long before answering. Regret. No. Weariness. Every day. But my father carried hangers on his back. My mother carried 2 jobs. Compared to that, what's my burden? Amira studied him. It's not just your burden anymore. You know that, right? He nodded slowly. That's the part I'm still learning to let others carry it with me. Behind them. The summit hall buzzed with energy, students debating, executives pledging reforms, advocates planning next steps. The movement had outgrown a single man. It was now many voices, many hands. As the sun dipped low, painting the river gold, Derrick rose. Time to head back in. There's more work to do. Amira smiled, and more stories to tell. Together they walked toward the hall, the crowd inside waiting not for a savior, but for a partner. Derrick thought again of that single seat on Flight 118 denied, then reclaimed, then transformed into a symbol, a seat that had become a platform, a seat that now belonged not just to him, but to everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. He whispered under his breath, almost a prayer, may tomorrow's seats be filled with dignity. And for the first time in months, the weight on his back felt lighter. Life teaches us that dignity is not given. It must be defended, sometimes quietly, sometimes with great courage. In this story, one man's refusal to surrender his seat became a turning point, not just for him, but for an entire industry. The lesson is simple, yet profound silence in the face of injustice only strengthens the walls that divide us. But a calm, firm stand can ripple out and touch lives far beyond our own. For those of us who have lived long enough to see cycles of change, it reminds us that progress is possible when we combine personal integrity with collective responsibility. Whether we are young or old, working or retired, we all carry the power to demand respect and fairness, not only for ourselves, but for those who come after us. The seat you defend today may be the seat your children or grandchildren sit in tomorrow.